platoon is a military unit typically composed of more than 2 squad sections. Platoon organization varies depending on the country and the branch, but typically a platoon might consist of 15 to 30 soldiers. A platoon is often led by a lieutenant, and is the smallest military unit typically led by a commissioned officer. In some armies, platoon is used throughout the branches of the army. In others, such as the British Army, platoons are associated with the infantry. In a few armies, such as the French Army, a platoon is specifically a cavalry unit, and the infantry use section is the equivalent unit. A unit of several platoons is often called a company. Early usage, etymology. According to Merriam-Webster, the term was first used in the 17th century to refer to a small body of musketeers who fired together in a volley alternately with another platoon. The word came from the 17th century French peloton, from pelote meaning a small ball. The suffix on can be an augmentative suffix in French, but on the other hand is generally a diminutive suffix in relationship to animals, so the original intention in forming peloton from pelote is not clear. Nonetheless, it is documented that it took the meaning of a group of soldiers firing a volley together, while a different platoon reloaded. This implies an augmentative intention in the etymology. Since soldiers were often organized in 2 or 3 lines, which were supposed to fire volleys together, this would have normally meant platoons organized with the intention of a half or a third of the company firing at once. The modern French word peloton, when not meaning platoon, can refer to a troop of animals or the main body of riders in a bicycle race. Pelote itself originally comes from the Low Latin pilotra from Latin pila, meaning ball, and the French suffix on derives from the Latin suffix onis. Used as a firing unit, the platoon was originally a firing unit rather than an organization. The system was said to have been invented by Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden in 1618. In the French army in the 1670s, a battalion was divided into 18 platoons who were grouped into 3 firings. Each platoon in the firing either actually firing or reloading. The system was used in the British, Austrian, Russian and Dutch armies as well. Modern usage. On October 1, 1913, under a scheme by General Sir Ivor Meigs, the British Army was reorganised from the previous 8 companies to a battalion's structure to a 4-company structure, with each company having 4 platoons as separate units, each commanded by a lieutenant with a platoon sergeant as his deputy. Each platoon was divided into 4 sections, each commanded by a corporal. When there was a shortage of officers, a non-commissioned officer rank of platoon sergeant major was created in 1938 and ceased in 1940. Australian organisation. In the Australian Army, a platoon has 24 soldiers organised into 3 8-man sections plus a lieutenant as platoon commander and a sergeant as platoon second-in-command, accompanied by a platoon radioman and medic. A section comprises 8 soldiers led by a corporal with a lance corporal as second-in-command. Each section has 2 fire teams of 4 men, one led by the corporal and the other by the lance corporal. Each fireteam has 1 soldier with a F-89A1 light machine gun and the other 3 armed with F-88 assault rifles. 1 rifle is equipped with an attached M203 grenade launcher for the grenadier's role, while another has a C-79 optical sight for the designated marksman role. The platoon may also have 3 Mag-58 general-purpose machine guns, 1 M2 Browning heavy machine gun or a Mk-19 grenade launcher at its disposal. British organisation. In the British Army, a rifle platoon from an infantry company consists of 3 sections of 8 men, plus a signaller, a platoon sergeant, the platoon commander and a mortarman operating a light mortar. This may not be the case for all British infantry units, since the 51mm mortars are not part of the TOE, post-Afghanistan. Under Army 2020, a platoon in the Heavy Protected Mobility Regiments will consist of around 30 soldiers and 4 Mastiff FRE SUV vehicles. Each section is commanded by a corporal, with a lance corporal as second-in-command and 6 privates divided into 2 4-man fireteams. Support weapons platoons are generally larger and are commanded by a captain with a colour sergeant or WO2 as 2-IC. Some sections are 7-man teams. An armoured platoon is known as a troop. Bangladeshi organisation. In Bangladesh Army infantry regiments, Platoons are commanded by a major or a captain, assisted by 2 to 4 lieutenants and at least 2 sergeants. The platoon strength is typically 30 to 50 soldiers. These platoons are equipped with at least one heavy machine gun, rocket launcher or anti-tank gun, with the crews of these weapons commanded by a corporal. In addition, there are at least 2 light machine guns, each commanded by a lance corporal. Each soldier is armed with an automatic or semi-automatic rifle and all commissioned officers carry a sidearm. Canadian organization: in the Canadian Army, the infantry platoon commander is a lieutenant or second lieutenant, assisted by a platoon warrant. It is usually divided into 3 8-man sections and a heavy weapons detachment which will deploy a GPMG, and a Carl Gustav, depending on mission requirements. Sections are commanded by a sergeant or master corporal with a master corporal or corporal in the second-in-command, or 2IC, position. 6 of the 8 soldiers in a section will carry C7 or C8 assault rifles fitted with either optics or a grenade launcher, and 2 members will carry C9 LMGs. A section is broken into 2 assault groups of 4 with 1 LMG and 3 assault rifles, similar to British and Australian organisation. 3 to 5 infantry platoons will make up a typical infantry company, sometimes with a heavy weapons or support platoon in addition. Specialist platoons like reconnaissance, or recce, platoons that may be attached to a battalion may be led by a captain and assisted by a warrant officer. Some very large specialist platoons will actually have a lieutenant as the second-in-command. In many corps, platoon-sized units are called troops instead. Prior to 1940, a platoon might be commanded by either a warrant officer WO3 or a lieutenant. An officer was referred to as platoon commander, while a WO3 in the same position was called a platoon sergeant major, or PSM. Colombian organization: within the Colombian Army, a training platoon is often commanded by a higher-ranking soldier known as a dragoniente, who is selected for his excellence in discipline and soldiering skills. However, a dragoniente is still a soldier and can be removed from his position if his commander sees fit. For combatant platoons, a corporal or sergeant would be the most likely commander. French organization: in the French military, a peloton is a unit of cavalry or armor corresponding to the platoon, equivalent in size to an infantry section, and commanded by a lieutenant or sergeant. It may also mean a body of officers in training to become non-commissioned officers, sous-officiers or officers. Finally, peloton copyright cushion is the French term for a firing squad. Georgian organization: the Georgian Armed Forces equivalent of the platoon is the so-called Ozili. Translated, it means group of 20, but has no more connection whatsoever with the number. It has been transferred into modern usage from medieval army reforms of the Georgian King David the Builder. Originally it was meant to be a small detachment of exactly 20 men to be led by a leader of corresponding rank. Almost all smaller formations are based on the designations of those reforms, which originally suggested tactical flexibility by keeping the size of small units in round numbers. Battalions and brigades were not affected by that system. It is unknown whether that usage was abandoned in 1820s or earlier, but in present days a Georgian platoon still called a Zulai has a similar size to that of other armies. Normally for infantry it are 32 men, but can vary depending on type of unit. German organization: the German army equivalent of the platoon is the Zug, consisting of a Zugtrupp, of 4 to 6 men, and 3 squads of 8 to 11 men each. An Oberfeldwebel is in charge of the Zugtrupp. The Zugtrupp provides support for the platoon leader and acts as a reserve force. 3 ZAR 1/4 GE make up a company, with the 1st platoon usually commanded by a company officer, an Oberleutnant or lieutenant, who is also the company's second-in-command. The 2nd and 3rd Zug are led by experienced NCOs, usually a Hautfeldwebel. In the 1st platoon, the platoon leader's assistant is a Hautfeldwebel. In the 2nd and 3rd platoons, the assistant is an Oberfeldwebel. Each squad is led by an Oberfeldwebel, and its size corresponds to the typical passenger capacity of its squad vehicle. Another of these vehicles is used for the Zugtrupp. Sergeants of inferior rank act as assistant squad leaders in the other squads. A Fallschirmjäger Kazug has special operations responsibilities, and his command positions one rank higher than corresponding positions in a standard infantry platoon. A captain is the platoon leader, assisted by a first lieutenant, and each squad has a second lieutenant or a master sergeant in charge, often supported by a long service sergeant or skilled senior corporal. New Zealand Organisation. In the New Zealand Army, an infantry platoon is commanded by a second lieutenant or a lieutenant with a platoon sergeant, a platoon signaller and a medic comprising the platoon headquarters. The platoon is subdivided into 3 sections of between 7 to 10 soldiers, each commanded by a corporal with a lance corporal as the Section 2 IC. Each section can be subdivided into 2 fire teams, commanded by the section commander and 2 IC respectively, as well as normal 2-man scout, rifle and gun teams. There are 3 platoons in a rifle company, which is commanded by a major, and 3 rifle companies within an infantry battalion, which is commanded by a lieutenant colonel. An infantry battalion will also contain an organic support company and a logistics company. Singapore Organisation. In the Singapore Army, a platoon is a lieutenant billet. In practice, usually a second lieutenant is appointed the platoon commander, and will eventually be promoted to this rank. A typical infantry platoon consists of 3 7-man sections of riflemen and a machine gun team, both commanded by 3rd sergeants, a platoon sergeant and a platoon medic, for a total of 27 soldiers. Beginning in 1992, the Singapore Armed Forces has allowed warrant officers to be appointed as platoon commanders. Thai Organisation. In the Royal Thai Army, a platoon is commanded by a lieutenant or second lieutenant assisted by a platoon sergeant, usually of the rank of sergeant major. In infantry units, rifle platoons are generally made up of 5 squads. United States Organization. United States Army. In the United States Army, rifle platoons are normally composed of 42 soldiers. They are led by a platoon leader, usually a second lieutenant, and with a platoon sergeant, usually a sergeant first class. Rifle platoons consist of 3 9-man rifle squads and 1 9-man weapons squad, each led by a staff sergeant. The platoon headquarters includes the PL, PSG, along with the PL's radio telephone operator, platoon forward observer, the FO's RTO and the platoon medic. United States Marine Corps. In the United States Marine Corps, rifle platoons are led by a platoon commander, usually a second lieutenant, assisted by a platoon sergeant, a staff sergeant. The platoon headquarters also includes a platoon guide, a sergeant, who serves as the assistant platoon sergeant, and a messenger. Rifle platoons consist of 3 rifle squads of 13 men each, led by a sergeant. A weapons platoon will usually have a first lieutenant and a gunnery sergeant because of the larger number of Marines and the more complex employment of the weapon systems included in these platoons. A weapons platoon has a 60 mm mortar section of 10 Marines and 3 M224 60 mm mortars, an assault section of 13 Marines and 6 SMAWs, and a medium machine gun section of 22 Marines and 6 M240 GS. Marine rifle or weapons platoons would also have 1 or more Navy hospital corpsmen assigned along with the Marines. United States Air Force. The United States Air Force has a similarly sized and configured unit called a flight. A flight usually ranges from a dozen people to over 100, or typically 4 aircraft. The typical flight commander is a captain. The typical flight chief is a master sergeant. Letter designations can be used, such as Alpha Flight, Bravo Flight, etc. USSR Organization. A motorized rifle platoon in the Soviet Armed Forces was mounted in either BTR armored personnel carriers or BMP infantry fighting vehicles, with the former being more numerous into the late 1980s. Both were led by a platoon leader and assistant platoon leader and consisted of 3 9-man rifle squads mounted in 3 vehicles. In both BMP and BTR squads, the driver and vehicle gunner stayed with the vehicle when the rest of the squad dismounted, and one squad in the platoon would have one of their riflemen armed with an SVD sniper rifle. there was either one empty seat in each BTO or two empty seats in each BMP to accommodate the platoon leader and assistant platoon leader. Tank platoons prior to the late 1980s consisted of a platoon headquarters squad and 3 tank squads, each consisting of one T-64, T-72 or T-80 tank for 12 personnel and 4 tanks total. Platoons which used the older T-54, T-55 or T-62s added an additional crew member for a total of 16. However, tank units operating in Eastern Europe began to standardize their platoons to just 2 tank squads, for a total of 3 tanks and 9 personnel. See also, Military Organization, Platoon, References, http, www.merriam-webster.com/platoon, http, www.merriam-webster.com/platoon, pages 250. Curtis, Thomas. The London Encyclopedia, or Universal Dictionary of Science, Art, Literature, and Practical Mechanics. Volume 9. Teg, 1829, pages 486. Lynn, John. A Giant of the Grand Sierre, The French Army, 1610–1715. Cambridge University Press, 140 2006, pages 404. Nimwegen, Olaf van the Dutch Army and the Military Revolutions, 1588–1688. Boydell and Brewer, 212,010, pages 25. Gudmundsson, Bruce. The British Expeditionary Force, 1914–15. Osprey Publishing, 102,005, http, www.janescom29502/British Army Infantry 2. Revert to 81mm mortar, http, www.scribdcom229240244/UK Army Combat Capability for the Future, Table of Ranks and Responsibilities. Canadian Soldiers. Retrieved August 9, 2012. U.S. Army Table of Organization, U.S. Army, FM 100-2-3. The Soviet Army, Troops, Organization and Equipment, 4-3, U.S. Army, FM 100-2-3. The Soviet Army, Troops, Organization and Equipment, paragraph 4-15, U.S. Army, FM 100-2-3. The Soviet Army, Troops, Organization and Equipment, paragraph 4-108, external links.